Hello everyone. Today I have come up with some questions which are based upon the past year papers of IGCSE Biology 0610. Now in this I have tried to put in questions in which students tend to usually make mistakes, or I find that they find it very confusing. Okay, now let's look at the question. Now, let's have a look at the question. Now, the question says, state what happens at X and at Y during the menstrual cycle. Now, here X is here. Now, this is the first few days of the cycle. Okay, so now in the first few days, what exactly happens? You can see here X and here X. Okay, in the first few days, what happens is the menstruation happens. So here in X we will write it down as menstruation. Now let's look at what happened in Y. Okay, now here you can see Y. If at all you see over here, you can see the LH hormone. This LH hormone, it has surged to its highest concentration. So that means here, what is the function of LH? The function of LH is to release the XL. Okay, so and what is release of XL? That is ovulation. So Y is ovulation. Okay, now let's go on to the subsequent question, which asks, describe the role of estrogen in controlling the menstrual cycle. Now this particular diagram which I have given over here, this is not given in your paper. I have just included it so that you can understand it much more better. Understanding here is more better than actually trying to by heart the whole answer. Okay, now here when you see, when the estrogen levels, when they are going higher, you can see that it is also thickening the uterine lining. So your first point here is that because of estrogen, what is happening? Your uterine line is thickening. So we can say that stimulates it stimulates the thickening of the walls of the uterus. Now, when we say that it is going to stimulate the thickening of the walls of the uterus, why is it doing it? It is doing it so that if at all fertilization takes place, then there can be implantation which takes place. So it is preparing the uterus for implantation, preparing the uterus for implantation. Now here you can see that when there is LH, okay, when there is an increase in the LH, okay, this LH is increased because of an increase in the estrogen levels. So the third point that you can write down is it releases, or it helps to release the LH, that is the luteinizing hormone. And your fourth point is that now once the luteinizing hormone is released, the XL also gets released from the ovary. Okay, now it should inhibit the release of FSH, because if at all FSH continues, or the follicle stimulating hormone, if it continues to be secreted, more and more follicles will be made in the ovary, so that has to be stopped. So this estrogen, when the level of estrogen, when it increases, okay, it also inhibits the release of FSH, which stops the release of more eggs. Okay, So this is for 4 marks, 4 points. Okay. So I hope the role of estrogen in controlling the menstrual cycle is clear. You can use this particular diagram for understanding your entire menstrual cycle. Okay. Now we move on to the next question. In this, it states some women cannot conceive and may be treated with the help of FSH. Okay. Now we have to describe as to how FSH is going to be used as a fertility drug and how it will help the women to conceive. Now the first point that you will write down is usually the causes of infertility in certain women is because she is not able to produce enough of FSH. We'll write down this point. The causes of infertility in certain women is because she is not producing enough of FSH. Now what can be done to cure this? We can inject the women with FSH. So we'll write down this point. And FSH is injected at the beginning of the menstrual cycle. At the beginning of the cycle. Now the third point will be, what is the exact function of FSH? FSH is going to stimulate the development of the follicle. Now if the follicle develops, naturally the egg is going to be released and thus the women can become pregnant. So the last point is, the function of FSH is to stimulate the development of the follicle. Okay, so here this question is for 2 marks and I've given you 3 points to be written down. If at all you write even 2 points, you will still get marks. Now the next question is, suggest one implication of using fertility drugs. Now what do you mean by the word implication? Implication means a result of using the fertility drug. Now a fertility drug can be used for couples who are unable to Now the next question, suggest one implication of using fertility drugs. Now the word implication means that the result of using fertility drugs. Now usually fertility drugs are given to couples who are unable to produce children. So this will allow, by giving these fertility drugs, these couples will be able to have children. So your first point will be, it will allow the couples who are infertile to have children. But one problem is that these drugs cannot treat infertility successfully. For the entire life, they cannot be treated. It is just for a small period of time. So, these drugs cannot treat infertility successfully. I hope these points are clear to you. Now the last question of this particular question is, explain why it is important that FSH is not secreted during pregnancy, why it should not be secreted during pregnancy. Now what is the main function of FSH? FSH is going to produce more and more of follicles. If more follicles get produced, more egg cells will also get produced. So do we really want any egg cells to be produced during pregnancy? No, right? So if FSH is released, we'll write down the first point as if FSH is released, more follicles will be formed which will lead to more eggs being released. And the second point is thus to stop the release of eggs and no more fertilization takes place, and also no more embryos get formed. So these are the 2 points you would write down for these 2 marks. Now the next question is based on the topic homeostasis. Now let's see what is a negative feedback mechanism with the help of an example. We are not going to write down whatever I'm explaining right now. We are not going to write it down in the exam. Okay, this is just for you to understand, and based upon that we will write down this particular answer. Now, what is the meaning of negative feedback mechanism? I'll tell you with the help of an example. Now, an example of negative feedback mechanism is when your body's temperature is too high and the negative feedback mechanism will act to bring it back to normal. For example, if the temperature outside is about 40 degrees and your body's temperature is 37, it will increase to 40. So the brain will detect this particular change and it will bring it back to normal, that is to 37 degrees. Okay. Now let's see in terms of the key words that we have to use while answering these questions. Okay, now let's take it up with the help of an example. For example, a person comes to your room and he switches on the AC. So the increase in temperature acts as a stimuli. So the increase in temperature acts as a stimuli. Okay, now this word stimuli is very important here. Fine. So the receptors on your skin will recognize this change in temperature. Fine. This is your next point. I reiterate, please do not write these as your answer. This is just for explanation. The receptors on the skin will recognize this change. What change? The change in temperature. So the receptor word is very important here. Now the impulses are being sent to the brain that there is a decrease in the body's temperature. The impulses are sent to the brain that the body's temperature is decreasing. Now the body would want to bring it back to normal with the help of the negative feedback mechanism. So the brain will send an impulse to the effector organ. Effector organ. Now what is your effector organ here? Your effector organ here will be your blood vessels. Now these blood vessels, they will undergo constriction. Now this constriction process is called as vasoconstriction. And when vasoconstriction happens, the blood vessels will all constrict and less amount of blood will flow through the blood vessels, and thus the heat in the body will be retained inside the body. Okay, so your blood vessels will become the effector. Okay, now let's put it across in the form of an answer. Now here in the question, they have only asked you as to how a negative feedback mechanism would work. Here you need not give any example, but we will give an answer which is general. Okay, so the first point here, you will say that the change is being detected by the receptors. This is your answer. The change is detected by the receptor. Please try to underline these important words. There is a release of a hormone or it could be a nerve impulse which is sent to the brain. Now the nerve impulse not the nerve impulse, the impulse reaches the target organ or the effector. The hormone or the impulse reaches the target organ or the effector. You will underline the word effector here again. Again I reiterate, please start underlining important words. It makes your answer very, very clear. The effector organ now performs the corrective action. Now the effector performs the corrective action and the factor return back to its normal condition. The factor returns to the normal condition. So these are the 4 points you will write down for these 4 marks.